The cantina was dark and smelled of cheap alcohol and fear. Strange alien creatures sat at tables, talking in hushed voices about old wars and lost battles. In the back corner, a four-armed creature with gray skin and glowing red eyes sat alone. His name was Zethkar. He was drinking his fifth glass of something that burned like fire. A young reporter approached his table. She was from the Galactic News Network, and she wanted to hear about the war that nobody talked about anymore. The war against the humans. Zethkar looked up at her with tired eyes. His forearms were covered in scars from plasma burns and blade cuts. One of his hands was missing 2 fingers. He had fought in many battles across the galaxy, but only one war had left him looking like this. "You want to know about the humans?" he said. It was not a question. He could smell the fear on her, the curiosity mixed with terror. Everyone wanted to know about the humans now. The reporter nodded and sat down. She placed a recording device. On the table between them, Zethkar stared at it for a long moment, then began to speak. 3 years ago, I was a different person. I was proud. I was strong. I believed in the Galactic Coalition and our mission to bring order to the galaxy. I had fought in 12 campaigns and won medals for bravery. I thought I knew what war was. Paused to take another drink. The liquid made his throat burn, but it helped him remember. Or maybe it helped him forget. He was never sure which. The Coalition had been watching the humans for many years. They lived on a small blue planet in a system called Sol. They had just learned to travel between stars, and their technology was very basic. Our scientists studied them and said they were no threat. They had crude weapons and simple ships. They were like children playing with toys. Zethkar's voice grew bitter. The Coalition Council decided that the human system would make a good outpost. The location was perfect for controlling trade routes. All we had to do was move the humans out of the way. Simple, easy. We had done it 1,000 times before with other species. The reporter leaned forward. "What made you think it would be easy?" "Everything," Zethkar replied. "Our intelligence reports showed that humans used kinetic weapons. Bullets and missiles that moved slowly compared to our energy weapons. They had no shields worth mentioning. Their ships were made of metal and held together with bolts and welding. We laughed at their primitive technology." He gestured with one of his scarred hands. Commander Vextel showed us videos of human military exercises. We watched their soldiers train with weapons that looked like toys. They moved slowly because they were weak. They had to rest often because they tired easily. They could only fight in certain conditions because their bodies were fragile. The memories came flooding back. Zethkar remembered sitting in the briefing room aboard the massive flagship Eternal Dominion. The room was filled with warriors from 12 different species. Ricasians like himself, with their natural armor and poison claws. Scalari with their multiple eyes and rapid reflexes. Thorgrim, with their massive size and incredible strength. All of them had fought in many wars. All of them were confident. "We brought 50,000 ships," Zethkar continued. "The largest fleet the Coalition had ever assembled. We had weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop the light of stars. The humans had maybe a few hundred ships total, and most of those were cargo vessels and mining ships." The reporter asked, "How many human soldiers were there?" "Intelligence said maybe 10 million trained fighters on their homeworld. Another few million scattered across their small colonies. We had brought 200 million warriors from across the galaxy. The numbers were so much in our favor that some commanders suggested we should just demand surrender without fighting." Zethkar's eyes grew distant. But the Coalition wanted to send a message. Other species were watching to see how we would handle the humans. If we showed mercy, if we negotiated, other primitive species might think they could resist us too. So the decision was made to crush the humans completely, show the galaxy what happened when you stood in the Coalition's way. He took another drink and continued. "The plan was simple. We would jump into their system with overwhelming force. Destroy their orbital defenses in the first hour. Land troops on their planet and occupy their major cities within a day. Entire war would be over in less than a week." The reporter scribbled notes on her tablet. "What went wrong?" Zethkar laughed, but there was no humor in it. Everything. From the very first moment, everything went wrong. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. We dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their system, 50,000 ships, in perfect formation. Our sensors immediately began scanning for human vessels. We found them easily. Small ships, maybe 200 of them, spread out in a defensive line between us and their planet. The memory was still clear in his mind. He had been on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Crimson Talon, watching the tactical displays. The human ships looked like insects compared to the Coalition fleet. Tiny specks of metal that should have been swept aside without effort. Our fleet commander, Admiral Korath, opened a communication channel to the humans. He offered them one chance to surrender. He told them they were outnumbered and outgunned. He said if they surrendered now, we would relocate them to mining colonies where they could live useful lives. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. The human response was short. Just 2 words. I said, "Come." On, the reporter looked confused. "Come on, what did that mean?" "It meant they wanted us to attack," Zethkar explained. "It was an invitation. A challenge. We thought they were being brave or stupid. We did not understand that they were being human." He paused to gather his thoughts. The next part was difficult to tell. Admiral Korath gave the order to advance. Our front line moved forward, weapons charging. The humans did not retreat. They did not spread out to make themselves harder targets. They just sat there, waiting. The tactical display had shown the Coalition fleet moving forward like a wall of destruction. Dreadnoughts and battle cruisers bristling with energy weapons. Fighter squadrons streaming ahead like clouds of death. It should have been the end of human resistance before it even began. Then the humans opened fire. Zethkar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They did not use energy weapons. They used something we had never seen in space combat. Kinetic projectiles moving at incredible speeds. Chunks of metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. The reporter's eyes widened. Impossible. The power requirements would be enormous. "That is what we thought," Zethkar agreed. But the humans had found a way. They called them railguns, magnetic accelerators that could launch projectiles faster than anything we had ever encountered. And they were not small projectiles. Some were the size of ground vehicles. The memory of that first salvo would haunt him forever. The projectiles moved too fast for our sensors to track properly. They appeared on our screens as streaks of light. Then they hit our shields. He gestured with his remaining fingers. Coalition shields are designed to stop energy weapons. Plasma bolts, particle beams, laser fire. They work by dispersing energy across a wide area. But these human projectiles were not energy. They were solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The reporter leaned forward, fascinated despite her. "Fear. What happened?" "The projectiles went through our shields like they were not there. They punched through our armor like paper. The first salvo hit our port flank. 17 dreadnoughts were destroyed in seconds, not damaged, destroyed completely." Zethkar's hands shook as he remembered. The projectiles were moving so fast that they passed through multiple ships before losing momentum. I watched one chunk of metal pass through 4 vessels in a line. Each impact created an explosion that lit up space like a new star. The Coalition fleet's confidence had died in that moment. In less than 30 seconds, they had lost more ships than in most entire campaigns, and the humans were just getting started. That was when we realized we were not fighting the war we had planned for, Zethkar said quietly. We were fighting something else entirely. Something we did not understand. The reporter stared at him, waiting for more. But Zethkar just sat there, staring into his drink, remembering the moment when everything changed forever. His 4 hands moved slowly, like an old man who had seen too much. The reporter waited quietly, knowing that pushing him would only make him stop talking. The cantina around them had grown quieter, as if the other patrons could sense the darkness of his story. "After the first attack, our fleet was in chaos," Zethkar continued. 17 of our best ships were gone in seconds. Admiral Korath was screaming orders, demanding to know how primitive. Humans had weapons that could pierce our shields. Our tactical officers had no answers. He took a long drink and stared at the wall. The human ships were still there, waiting. They had not moved from their defensive positions. Our sensors showed that they were charging their weapons again. We realized they could fire those terrible projectiles more than once. The Coalition fleet had spread out, trying to present smaller targets. But the human weapons had a range that surprised everyone. The metal projectiles could travel across the entire solar system and still hit with devastating force. Commander, this time we would be ready. Our ships would move in random patterns to avoid the human weapons. We would overwhelm them with our superior numbers. Zethkar's voice grew bitter. We still thought we understood what we were fighting. We thought that once we adapted to their railguns, the battle would go back to normal. The second wave had consisted of 50 battlecruisers and 200 escort vessels. They moved forward in a complex pattern, changing direction every few seconds. The Coalition computers calculated that this would make them impossible to target accurately. The humans waited until our ships were halfway across the system. Then they fired again. This time was different. This time we learned something terrible about human weapons. The reporter looked up from her notes. What did you learn? Their projectiles were not just chunks of metal, Zethkar explained. Some of them were guided. They could change direction during flight. Our evasive maneuvers meant nothing. The projectiles followed our ships like hunting animals. The memory still made his stomach turn. He had watched on the tactical display as human projectiles curved through space, adjusting their paths to intercept Coalition vessels. The laws of physics said it should be impossible. Moving objects could not change direction without thrust. The projectiles were moving too fast for any normal propulsion system. Our scientists later learned that the humans used something called gravity manipulation. It was technology we had never imagined. The second wave had been destroyed almost as completely as the first. 38 ships lost, with only a few managing to retreat back to the main fleet. The Coalition had lost over 50 major vessels, and had not even scratched the human defensive line. Admiral Korath had been furious. He ordered the entire fleet to advance at maximum speed. The plan was to close the distance quickly, getting inside the range where the human railguns would be less effective. That was when we met the human boarding parties, Zethkar said quietly. The reporter frowned. Boarding parties? But you said the human ships were much smaller than yours? They were. But humans do not think the way other species think. When our fleets got close enough for boarding actions, we expected them to try to keep their distance. Instead, they flew their ships directly at ours. They rammed us. Zethkar's scarred hands gestured in the air, showing the movements of the battle. A human ship called the Defiant Hope crashed into the side of our flagship. The collision should have destroyed both vessels. Instead, the human ship had reinforced its front section with extra armor. It punched through our hull like a spear. The human ship had been commanded by someone called Jake Morrison. Coalition intelligence files said he was a mining ship captain with no military training. But when his vessel penetrated the Eternal Dominion's hull, his crew had poured out like a flood of destruction. Morrison's people were not wearing power armor like our soldiers. They had simple pressure suits and basic weapons, but they moved through our ship like they owned it. They seemed to know exactly where to go and what to destroy. The human boarding party had consisted of only 24 people. The Eternal Dominion carried a crew of 3,000, with 500 trained warriors. The numbers should have meant an easy victory for the Coalition forces. The humans did not fight like soldiers, Zethkar continued. They fought like something wild. When they ran out of ammunition, they used their tools as weapons. When their tools broke, they used pieces of our own ship. I saw one human female tear a piece of bulkhead plating off the wall and use it as a shield. The reporter looked skeptical. How could they tear apart a starship with their bare hands? Human strength is not just in their muscles, Zethkar explained. It is in their minds. They refuse to accept that something is impossible. If they need to break through a wall, they find a way. If they need to lift something heavy, they find a way. If they need to survive in space without proper equipment, they find a way. They had begun to reprogram the ship's computer systems while fighting off defenders. The human called. Morrison was not just a soldier. While his people held off our warriors, he connected his portable computer to our ship's main systems. He began to change our programming. The Coalition had always assumed that their computer systems were secure. The interfaces were designed for specific alien physiologies, and the programming languages were incredibly complex. It should have taken years for an outsider to learn how to use them. Morrison broke into our systems in less than an hour, turned our own ship's defenses against us. Our security doors began locking Coalition soldiers out of important areas. Our internal communications stopped working. Our life support systems began to fail in sections where our people were fighting. But the worst part had been what Morrison did to the ship's weapons. Instead of trying to destroy them, he had turned them toward other Coalition vessels. The Eternal Dominion had opened fire on its own fleet, targeting the command centers of nearby ships. In one attack, the humans had captured our flagship and turned it into a weapon against us. Zethkar's voice dropped to a whisper. That was when we began to understand what we were really fighting. The humans were not just another species with better weapons. They were something new, something that did not follow the rules we understood. The battle had continued for 6 more hours. More human ships had broken through the Coalition lines, and more boarding parties had taken control of Coalition vessels. Each captured ship became a weapon against the fleet that had built it. By the end of the first day, we had lost over 200 ships. The humans had lost maybe 30. But those 30 ships had been turned into guided missiles, rammed into our largest vessels at the moment of maximum damage. The Coalition fleet had been forced to retreat to the outer edge of the solar system. Admiral Korath had called for reinforcements and began planning a new strategy. But the damage was already done. Word of the defeat had spread throughout the fleet faster than official communications. We had never faced an enemy that fought like the humans. They did not just want to win the battle. They wanted to turn our own strength against us. Every ship we brought to fight them could become a weapon in their hands. The reporter asked, "What did the Admiral decide to do?" Zethkar finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. He decided to show the humans what real war looked like. He called for ground forces. If we could not defeat them in space, we would invade their planet directly. He looked up at the reporter with haunted eyes. That was the biggest mistake we ever made. The cantina had grown even quieter now, as other patrons had stopped their conversations to listen to Zethkar's story. The old warrior did not seem to notice. His red eyes stared into empty space as he remembered things he wished he could forget. Admiral Korath was angry after losing so many ships, Zethkar continued. He sent messages to Coalition Command, requesting permission to use orbital bombardment. He wanted to crack the human planet from space and be done with it. The reporter leaned forward. Why didn't he do that from the beginning, Coalition? Needed the planet intact, Zethkar explained. The human world had resources we wanted, cities we could use, infrastructure that would save us years of construction. Destroying it all would defeat the purpose of the invasion. So instead, Admiral Korath had ordered a ground assault. The Coalition had brought 2 million soldiers in specialized landing craft. They had power armor that could stop most weapons, personal shields that deflected energy attacks, and vehicles that could cross any terrain. We thought the ground war would be easier, Zethkar said with a bitter laugh. In space, the humans had the advantage of their strange weapons and tactics. On the ground, we would have superior numbers, better equipment, and more experience. The first wave of Coalition landing craft had descended toward the human planet. The ships were heavily armored and carried shield generators that could protect them from most ground-based weapons. Intelligence reports said the humans had no significant anti-aircraft systems. The humans let us land, Zethkar continued. Did not try to shoot down our transports. They just watched as we established our beachheads on 6 different continents. We thought they were afraid. We thought they had given up. The Coalition forces had landed near major human cities. The plan was to capture the population centers quickly, then move outward to control the rest of the planet. Each landing zone had been scouted by orbital surveillance. The humans appeared to have no significant military presence in any of the target areas. The first sign something was wrong came when we tried to advance into the cities, Zethkar said. Our vehicles could not move. The humans had destroyed all the roads and bridges during the night. They had flooded subway tunnels and collapsed building foundations. In 12 hours, they had turned their own cities into obstacles. Major Rick Hamilton had been in command of human forces in the ruins of New York. Coalition intelligence files showed he was a former police officer with no military training. His soldiers were civilians, teachers, factory workers, store clerks, who had picked up weapons when the invasion began. Hamilton's people did not fight us in open battle, Zethkar explained. They hid in the ruins of their own city. Every building could contain snipers. Every pile of rubble could hide explosives. Every street corner could be an ambush point. The coalition soldiers had advanced slowly through the destroyed city. Their power armor protected them from small arms fire, and their shields could stop most explosives. But the humans did not use normal tactics. They attacked our supply lines instead of our soldiers. Zethkar continued. They destroyed our communication equipment instead of trying to kill our warriors. They made us blind and deaf in our own occupied territory. Hamilton's forces had studied coalition equipment for months before the invasion. They knew that power armor needed regular battery changes. They knew that personal shields overheated after extended use. They knew that coalition soldiers relied heavily on their technology. The humans turned the city into a maze, Zethkar said. They used their construction equipment to move buildings, to create new walls and barriers every night. Routes that were clear one day would be blocked the next, could never learn the layout because it kept changing. The coalition had brought hover tanks and armored walkers to support the ground troops. These vehicles were designed to handle any terrain and could punch through most obstacles. But the humans had prepared for them too. Hamilton's people had dug tunnels under the entire city, Zethkar explained. Not just the subway system that already existed, but new tunnels connecting every building, every block, every neighborhood. They could appear anywhere and disappear just as quickly. The human tunnel system had been dug using mining equipment and construction tools. It was not sophisticated, but it was effective. Coalition forces would clear a building of enemies, only to find it full of human fighters again, an hour later. We started to understand that we were not fighting an army, Zethkar said quietly. We were fighting an entire population. Every human on the planet seemed to be part of their resistance. Children carried messages. Old people provided shelter. Even their sick and wounded found ways to help. The reporter looked confused. How could civilians be effective against trained soldiers? Because they knew their own world better than we did, Zethkar replied. They knew which buildings had basements, which sewers connected to which areas, which rooftops provided the best hiding spots. They had lived in these cities their entire lives. We had studied them for a few months. Coalition forces had tried to use their superior firepower to level entire city blocks. But the humans had evacuated the civilians and turned the rubble into even better defensive positions. Every destroyed building became a fortress. Major Hamilton contacted us after 2 weeks of fighting, Zethkar continued. He offered to negotiate. Admiral Korith agreed to meet with him, thinking the humans were ready to surrender. The meeting had taken place in what remained of a large building in the center of the city. Hamilton had arrived alone, carrying only a white flag. He was a small man with gray hair and tired eyes. He did not look like a dangerous enemy. Hamilton told Admiral Korith that the coalition could have the city, Zethkar said. All of them. But he wanted something in return. The Admiral had been suspicious. Humans were clearly losing the ground war. Their casualties were much higher than coalition losses. Their equipment was running out. Why would they negotiate from a position of weakness? Hamilton explained that the humans did not need to win the war. Zethkar continued. They just needed to make it too expensive for us to continue. Every day we stayed on their planet cost us soldiers, equipment, and resources. Every week made the war more unpopular with coalition member species. The human negotiator had pulled out a small device and showed Admiral Korith a series of images. Pictures of coalition soldiers being treated in field hospitals. Reports of equipment shortages. Messages from coalition worlds asking when their soldiers would come home. Hamilton said that humans were willing to fight for years, Zethkar explained. Decades if necessary. They would never stop resisting, never stop making our occupation costly. He asked the admiral how long the coalition was willing to fight for one small planet. Admiral Korath had dismissed the negotiation and returned to his ship. He ordered increased military pressure on all fronts. The coalition would crush human resistance through overwhelming force. That was when the humans revealed their final surprise, Zethkar said grimly. For weeks, coalition forces had been fighting what they thought was the entire human military. But Hamilton's forces in the cities were just militia and civilian volunteers. The real human army had been waiting. It came up from underground bunkers we never knew existed, Zethkar continued. Professional soldiers with military training and proper equipment. They had been planning for this invasion for years. Colonel Lisa Bradley led the human counterattack with forces that had been hidden in deep shelters. These were not civilians with hunting rifles. These were trained soldiers with weapons designed specifically to fight coalition forces. Bradley's people knew everything about our equipment, Zethkar explained. They had studied captured coalition technology from other wars. They knew the weak points in our armor, the frequencies that could disrupt our shields, the tactics that would be most effective against our formations. The human counterattack had been perfectly coordinated. While coalition forces were spread out across 6 continents fighting urban resistance, the real human army struck at their supply bases and landing zones. In 3 days, we lost half our ground equipment, Zethkar said. Our landing zones were overrun, our supply lines were cut, our communication networks were destroyed. The coalition ground forces found themselves trapped in hostile cities with no way to retreat and no way to get reinforcements. They were surrounded by an entire planet that wanted them gone. That was when Admiral Korath made the decision that ended his career, Zethkar said quietly. He called for orbital bombardment after all. He decided to destroy the cities with our own soldiers still inside them, the reporter gasped. He was willing to kill his own people, Zethkar nodded slowly. He thought it was the only way to break human resistance. He thought that if we showed we were willing to sacrifice our own soldiers, the humans would finally surrender. The old warrior stared into his empty glass. He was wrong about that too. Zethkar signaled for another drink. His 4 hands shook as he lifted the glass to his mouth. The reporter noticed that the other patrons in the cantina had moved closer, trying to hear every word of his story. Even the bartender had stopped, cleaning glasses to listen. Admiral Korath gave the order to fire on our own positions, Zethkar continued. He thought that sacrificing 2 million coalition soldiers would be worth it if we could break the human spirit. He believed that once the humans saw we would kill our own people to win, they would finally surrender. The orbital bombardment had begun at dawn on the human planet. Coalition warships in orbit opened fire with their most powerful weapons, targeting the cities where their own ground forces were trapped. Energy beams that could melt mountains struck downtown areas where coalition and human soldiers fought in the ruins. The bombardment lasted for 6 hours, Zethkar said quietly. We destroyed 6 major cities completely. Millions of humans died. Most of our ground forces died too. Admiral Korath watched it all from his command ship, convinced he was finally winning the war. But something strange had happened during the bombardment. Coalition monitoring stations across the galaxy had detected massive energy surges coming from the human solar system. At first, the technicians thought it was just the reflection of their own weapons fire. And we learned later that the humans had been building something in secret, Zethkar explained. While we were fighting in their cities, their scientists and engineers were working on a project hidden deep underground, something they called the Phoenix Protocol. The energy surges had been the activation of weapons platforms the humans had been constructing for months. Not orbital stations or surface installations, but something much more dangerous. They had built their weapons inside asteroids and small moons throughout their solar system. The humans had turned their entire star system into a fortress. Zethkar continued. Every piece of space rock larger than a building had been hollowed out and filled with weapons. Thousands of hidden bases, all connected by quantum communication networks. Admiral Nicole Parker had been in command of the real human space fleet. While the coalition had been fighting converted mining ships and patrol craft, she had been preparing humanity's true military response. Ships that were larger and more advanced than anything in the coalition intelligence files. Parker's flagship was called the Phoenix Rising, Zethkar said. It was bigger than our largest battle station when it appeared on our sensors. Our tactical officers thought it was a small moon that had somehow moved into the wrong orbit. The Phoenix Rising had emerged from behind one of the human system's gas giants, where it had been hidden for the entire war. With it came a fleet of vessels that made the Coalition ships look like toys. Humanity had been building these ships in secret for decades. Their main weapon was something they called a gravity cannon, Zethkar explained. It fired concentrated waves of gravitational force that could crush our ships from the inside out. Our shields meant nothing. Our armor meant nothing. The weapon attacked the space around our vessels, making it impossible for matter to exist there. The first gravity wave had struck the Coalition flagship Eternal Dominion. The massive dreadnought had simply collapsed inward, crushed by forces that violated everything the Coalition understood about physics. 3,000 crew members had died in seconds. Parker's people did not just have better weapons, Zethkar continued. They had better everything. Their ships moved faster than ours, turned quicker than ours, and could coordinate their actions perfectly across the entire battlefield. The humans had developed something they called quantum entanglement communication. Every ship in their fleet was connected to every other ship instantly, regardless of distance. While Coalition forces had to wait for radio signals to travel across space, human commanders could coordinate their attacks in real time. Commander Steve Carter led a squadron of human destroyers against our supply convoy, Zethkar said. His 12 ships attacked 18 different targets simultaneously, hitting each one at exactly the same moment. It looked like magic. Carter's forces had appeared to be everywhere at once. His ships would attack a Coalition vessel, disappear before the defenders could respond, then appear somewhere else to attack a different target. The coordination was so perfect that Coalition analysts initially thought they were facing a much larger force. We realized that the humans had been studying us for much longer than we had been studying them, Zethkar explained. Every weapon we used, every tactic we employed, every strategy we attempted, they had already prepared countermeasures. The Coalition had brought their most advanced plasma rifles to the war, weapons that could cut through any known armor, and had proven effective against dozens of other species. But the humans had developed personal shield generators that could deflect plasma bolts harmlessly. Human engineer Kevin Barnes had taken one of our captured plasma rifles and made it better, Zethkar continued. He increased its power output by 300% and made it fire twice as fast. Then he gave the design to every human soldier. Barnes had done more than just improve Coalition weapons. He'd figured out how to manufacture them using human industrial techniques. Within weeks, human forces were using Coalition technology that was superior to what the Coalition itself possessed. The humans learned faster than we could adapt, Zethkar said. Every advantage we tried to use became an advantage for them. Every new weapon we deployed was captured, studied, and improved within days. But the most terrifying thing about the human response was not their technology. It was their attitude. Even after losing millions of people to orbital bombardment, even after seeing their cities destroyed, they had not become desperate or angry. They had become more focused. Admiral Parker contacted Admiral Korath after the bombardment, Zethkar continued. She did not threaten him or demand revenge. She simply told him that the rules of engagement had changed. Parker had explained that up to that point, the humans had been fighting a defensive war. They had been trying to minimize casualties on both sides while protecting their territory. Oh, but the orbital bombardment had shown that the Coalition was willing to commit what humans called war crimes. Parker said that since the Coalition had chosen to target civilians and use weapons of mass destruction, his humanity would respond in kind, Zethkar explained. She gave Admiral Korath 24 hours to withdraw all Coalition forces from the human system. Admiral Korath had laughed at the ultimatum. He still commanded over 40,000 ships, even after his losses. The human fleet numbered less than 5,000 vessels. The math seemed simple. That was when we learned about human weapons that could destroy entire worlds, Zethkar said quietly. The humans had built something they called planet crackers. Missiles that could burrow into a world's core and detonate with enough force to split continents. They had targeted every Coalition member world within 50 light years of their system. Parker showed us the targeting data. Zethkar continued. 12 billion Coalition civilians on 37 different planets. All of them would die if Admiral Korath did not withdraw. The threat had not been a bluff. Human deep space monitors had detected the planet cracker missiles moving toward their targets. Each missile was small enough to avoid most sensor nets, but powerful enough to destroy a civilization. Admiral Korath realized that he was not fighting a war anymore, Zethkar said. He was in a hostage situation where both sides had weapons pointed at each other's families. But Parker had offered an alternative. Instead of mutual destruction, she proposed single combat. The best of human forces against the best of Coalition. Forces, winner take all. A battle that would decide the war without killing billions of innocent people. The Admiral agreed, Zethkar continued. He thought that even if human technology was superior, Coalition numbers would still win in a direct fight. He chose the asteroid belt between their 4th and 5th planets as the battleground. General Patricia Lewis had commanded the human forces in that final battle. She had taken personal control of a modified assault ship called the Indomitable, and led from the front lines. Lewis was a career soldier who had been planning for this war since she was a young officer. Lewis did not just outfight us, Zethkar said. She outhought us. Every move we made, she had already anticipated. Every strategy we tried, she had already countered. It was like fighting someone who could see the future. The battle had lasted 18 hours. Coalition forces had tried every tactic they knew, used every weapon in their arsenal, employed every strategy that had worked in previous wars. Nothing had been effective against human forces. In the end, we were not defeated, Zethkar said quietly. We were dismantled. Lewis's people did not just destroy our ships. They captured them intact, took our crews prisoner, and seized all our military intelligence. The old warrior stared at the table. That was when we realized the truth. The humans had never been trying to win a war. They had been trying to send a message to the entire galaxy. The cantina was completely silent now. Every alien in the room was listening to Zethkar's words. The reporter had stopped taking notes and was staring at the old warrior with wide eyes. Even the sounds from the street outside seemed to have faded away. General Lewis offered us something no other species had ever offered to the Coalition, Zethkar said slowly. Mercy. The final battle in the asteroid belt had ended with the complete surrender of Coalition forces. Admiral Korath's flagship had been captured intact, along with most of his remaining fleet. 2 million Coalition soldiers had been taken prisoner, expecting to be executed or enslaved according to standard galactic warfare practices. Lewis came aboard our ships personally to accept the surrender, Zethkar continued. She was not what we expected. She was smaller than most Coalition warriors, older than most combat commanders, and she carried no weapons. But when she walked onto our bridge, everyone stepped back. No. The human general had looked around the bridge of the Eternal Dominion with calm eyes. She had examined the control panels, studied the tactical displays, and reviewed the ship's systems. With the curiosity of an engineer rather than the anger of a conqueror, Lewis told Admiral Korath that the war was over, Zethkar said. Not just this battle, but the entire conflict. She said that humanity had proven its point and now wanted to discuss terms. The terms had been unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Instead of demanding tribute or territory, the humans had asked for something much more valuable. They wanted to be left alone. Lewis presented Admiral Korath with a treaty, Zethkar explained. It was simple. The Coalition would withdraw from the human system immediately. All Coalition forces would return to their homeworlds. In exchange, humanity would release all prisoners and provide medical care for the wounded. Admiral Korath had been suspicious. Victorious species always demanded payment from the defeated. They took resources, claimed territory, or enslaved populations. No one simply asked to be left alone after winning such a complete victory. Lewis explained that humans did not want to rule other species, Zethkar continued. They did not want Coalition territory or Coalition resources. They just wanted to live in peace in their own system. But there had been additional terms in the treaty. The coalition would establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Human observers would be allowed to visit coalition worlds. And most importantly, the coalition would never again attack a species simply because they were considered primitive. Lewis said that humanity would be watching, Zethkar explained. If the coalition continued to conquer and enslave other species, humans would intervene. They'd have proven they could defeat coalition forces. Next time, they might not be so merciful. The threat had been delivered quietly, without anger or dramatic gestures. Lewis had simply stated facts. Humanity now possessed weapons that could destroy worlds, fleets that could defeat any coalition force, and the will to use both if necessary. Admiral Korath signed the treaty, Zethkar said. He had no choice. The alternative was the complete destruction of the coalition and the death of billions of civilians. The release of coalition prisoners had taken 3 months. Every soldier, every crew member, every officer had been returned to their home worlds unharmed. The humans had provided medical treatment for the wounded and psychological counseling. For those who needed it, they treated us better than we had ever treated our own prisoners, Zethkar admitted. Human medical teams worked around the clock to save coalition soldiers who had been trying to kill them days before. It was something we had never seen. But the most shocking part had been the human offer to share technology. Lewis had provided coalition scientists with basic designs for gravity manipulation, quantum communication, and advanced medical techniques. Not weapons, but tools that could improve life for every species in the galaxy. They gave us technology that would have taken us centuries to develop, Zethkar said. Medical devices that could heal injuries we considered permanent, communication systems that could connect the entire galaxy instantly, energy sources that could power our worlds without depleting resources. The technology transfer had come. With conditions, the coalition could use human innovations for peaceful purposes, but any attempt to weaponize them would result in immediate human intervention. Monitoring systems would ensure compliance. Lewis told us that humans had been watching the galaxy for a long time, Zethkar continued. They had seen what the coalition did to other species. They had decided that if they ever became spacefaring, they would put an end to it. The war had officially ended 18 months ago. The coalition had signed formal peace treaties with Earth and established embassies on both sides. Human advisors now worked with coalition military forces, teaching new tactics and strategies. The young soldiers asked me what makes humans so dangerous, Zethkar said quietly. They think it is the weapons or the ships or the technology. But that is not what makes them terrifying. He paused to finish his drink, then looked directly at the reporter. What makes humans dangerous is that they choose to fight. Every other species in the galaxy fights because they have to, because they are attacked, or because they need resources, or because their leaders tell them to. Humans fight because they decide that something is worth fighting for. The reporter leaned forward. What do you mean? During the war, we captured human soldiers and questioned them, Zethkar explained. We wanted to know why they were willing to die for their planet. Most species fight to protect their families or their tribes. But humans were fighting for people they had never met, for ideas they believed in, for a future they might never see. One human prisoner had been a young soldier named Tony Mitchell. He had been captured during the fighting in New York and interrogated by coalition intelligence officers. When asked why he was fighting, Mitchell had given an answer that confused his captors. Mitchell said he was fighting for his great-grandchildren, Zethkar continued. People who did not even exist yet. He said that if humans surrendered to the coalition, future generations would grow up as slaves. He was willing to die to prevent that. The concept had been difficult for coalition officers to understand. Most species fought for immediate concerns: food, territory, safety. The idea of sacrificing oneself for hypothetical future people seemed irrational. But that is what makes humans different, Zethkar said. They do not just fight for what they can see. They fight for what they believe should exist. They fight for ideas. Another captured human had been Dr. Sarah Martinez, a civilian doctor, who had been treating wounded soldiers in the ruins of Los Angeles. When coalition forces had demanded that she'd stop helping human fighters, she had refused. Dr. Martinez told us that she had taken an oath to help all injured people, Zethkar continued. It did not matter if they were soldiers or civilians, friends or enemies. She said that healing people was more important than winning wars. The doctor had continued to treat wounded humans even when coalition forces threatened to kill her. She had been willing to die for the principle that medical care should be available to everyone who needed it. These humans were not fighting just to win, Zethkar explained. They were fighting to prove that their way of thinking was correct. They believed that all intelligent species should be free to choose their own destiny. They were willing to die for that belief. The war had changed more than just the balance of power in the galaxy. It had introduced new ideas about warfare, diplomacy, and the treatment of other species. Human concepts like prisoner rights, civilian protection, and proportional response were now being adopted by other governments. The coalition still exists, Zethkar said, but it is different now. We no longer conquer primitive species. We offer them membership instead of slavery, trade with them instead of taking their resources by force. The changes had not been easy. Many coalition species had built their economies on conquest and exploitation. Switching to peaceful trade and voluntary cooperation had required massive adjustments. Some coalition worlds have prospered under the new system, Zethkar continued. They have formed partnerships with species they once would have enslaved. They have learned that cooperation is more profitable than conquest. But other worlds had struggled. Military officers who had built their careers on successful invasions found themselves without purpose. Weapons manufacturers faced reduced demand. For their products, entire economies had to be restructured. The humans helped with the transition, Zethkar said. They sent advisors and teachers. They shared technology and knowledge. They proved that former enemies could become allies. The reporter asked, "Do you think the peace will last?" Zethkar was quiet for a long moment, stared at his empty glass, then looked around the cantina at the other patrons. All of them were veterans of various wars. All of them carried scars from old battles. Peace will last as long as humans are watching, he said finally. They have shown that they can defeat any force in the galaxy, but more importantly, they have shown that they will use that power to protect others. The old warrior stood up slowly, his forearms supporting his weight against the table. The young ones think that humans are just another powerful species. They do not understand what really happened in that war.